Hashtag RIP Allan Asherman and the writer's strike. Today on Trekland Tuesdays Live with me, Dr. Trek Larry Nemecek, coming at you right here from the heart of Trekland through Portal 47 via Trekland Treks for some sanity, clarity, and the big picture in things Star Trek. So happy Tuesday, everybody. Yeah, I've got a split focus this week. I've got a split focus even as we head into the fall, and it's Star Trek location tour season. So if you're headed to LA, or even if you're not, maybe you'll think about heading this way, spending a day or two with me, letting me help you set up, plan, and then guide you on your own customized, unique Star Trek away mission, your own landing party to the location sites that you pick. You pick four, we have lunch, we have a great day. I am your driver, your concierge, your prop wrangler, your cosplay holder. TreklandTreks.com. Check it out, will you? All righty. Now, I've got a split focus this week. I was already intending to talk about someone, and then boom, yeah, we had the news that these guys, as we've seen it the last few months, the writer's strike is tentatively over. It's got to cross the T's, dot the I's, and have final votes. Writer's strike is done. The picketing is done. This fellow, as such, you won't see the familiar black and red signs. You know, the full bore one here. The Writers Guild is settled. There's no picketing while they are getting the contract certified, all the wording done legal, and then submitted to the channels, the negotiating committee approval, then the national board approval. Then it'll be submitted to membership in 10 days, 2 weeks. We'll see. There'll be a few days for writing. And then once a new deal is ratified, then they will take legal steps to formally end the strike. But for right now, they're technically still on strike. And you know what? Yes, this is the sign from the Star Trek Day site that I did. I didn't do one. I didn't do my own sign. Yes, I did, but it wasn't this clever. It wasn't, it wasn't like this. But this gal is going to go back in the historical closet. But what is happening is there's no end to the strikes. Just to clarify now, the actors are still on strike. SAG-AFTRA is still on strike in LA and New York, everywhere. That also means that anybody allied SAG-AFTRA, for SAG-AFTRA, that means the Writers Guild, as much as the Teamsters, IATSE, fans, family, there are still pickets going on. And there are Writers Guild members, solidarity, strength. There are Writers Guild members who are free to go join their strike, just as many actors came over and walked the line, and IATSE, and the Teamsters, and fans and friendly, to join their strike, just as they had done before the actors were on strike. So you'll see that. Now, they won't be using Writers Guild signs. They may have Writers Guild in support of, but there will be no more Writers Guild on strike signs, you'll see. And the buttonage will all shift for that accordingly, too. I know the news broke Sunday night. You had the idea that once they met Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and Saturday, that they were on the home run deal here. There was a lot of cynical talk about they wanted to wrap up before the Yom Kippur holiday, that there was a lot of wanting to wrap up before the fourth quarter started October 1st, whatever. And of course, all kinds of cynical hindsight saying, well, if you did this fast right now, it's the same thing you could have done 5 days in. You could have done it before there was a need to call a strike. AMPTP, studios, you could have done this at day one, much less day zero. But we are here. It was day 146, 1 day away from the magic 147, obviously. There you go. No one wanted to hit 47, apparently. But here we are. And most importantly, the actors are still out there. Can the producer studios walk and chew gum at the same time? Can they restart talks with it? Now, they haven't, and we would know that because there would be a joint statement between the AMPTP and SAG-AFTRA to say, yes, we are restarting talks, just the same way we had with the Writers Guild, a week ago. We will restarting at this day coming up soon in the future, as soon as people can align their schedules for live meetings. So we're waiting on that. But the point is that, as usual, of the 3 big guilds, and the directors checked out early, oops, didn't get as good a deal, I'm sure. The writers are usually the ones there's like 11,500 Writers Guild members. I forget how many actors there are, but they're the hugest, and they're the smallest in the Directors Guild. And that's even including the first and second ADs and some of the other associated professions. Now, the writers are like the middle child, and they're kind of the one that unifies the easiest, and they're the ones that, I'll say it, can be the most militant. And they are the ones that are often the canary in the coal mine when it comes to, if there's a new wall of technology or process like this year, they're the ones to finally, once they break through that wall, now there's a lot of talking points, and there's a measurement systems, there's transparency systems agreed to. We're still waiting on the details from the Writers Guild contract. Little bits are gonna slip out. They will talk to the membership will share with the public, or they will put out statements. Once some of those paradigms have been created, some of those walls have been crashed, now they've got language and talking points and conceptual designs around that they can structure that to the actors, because a lot of these things overlap. AI, the way residuals, and everything to do with streaming, it's not new media anymore, and that's what had been bleeding everybody dry. Oh, it's new, we don't know how to measure and pay on this. Well, thank you, it's been 8-10 years now. So we'll see how fast things swivel around to the actors. We'll see, once it does, how fast things come together for them. But there's still no shooting. There's still no structured written production, and anything involving SAG-AFTRA is obviously not happening. Technically, the writers aren't even supposed to be back at work, although, the way everybody hates deadlines, minds are spinning. So we will see what's going on. Anyway, the light's at the end of the tunnel, and it's coming oncomingly quickly. So that's all good. It's just going to be a transition time as things get back to work, hopefully. And as the world starts to breathe again. Meanwhile, it has been a long, hot labor summer. The UAW is on strike. And I'm still going to say, when we look back at this year, the pandemic ripped the Band-Aid, exposed so many ills of our society and economic, so much unfairness and injustice. It's had repercussions all the way from education to the sociology and psychology of our kids to essential workers. And what we intellectually learn hasn't always translated into economic terms. And what's more, there have been a lot of people underappreciated, underpaid in a completely societal way. When I say people, I mean professions and unions and guilds and arenas of work, and maybe just, the entire middle class. And it'll be amazing if somewhere between the pandemic and, of all people, the Writers Guild as the tip of the spear to maybe start rebalancing some of the things that are out of whack in this economy that cause so much hurt and pain. And even for people in hurt and pain to act out in ways that don't benefit their own interests, but it feels good because they feel like they're striking out and who they've been told is the reason for their distress. Yeah. So no, I've still got my solidarity. Thank you, Star Trek Snack Squad, for these buttons. They're still at work. And there are still people in need of assistance, because as long as the writers, the actors are still on strike, there is no production. And that means everybody outside the writers and actors, it means all of the crews, all the support people who don't have a union. That means nobody is working still. And there is pain with rent, and there's pain with putting food on the table and not having jobs. So anybody that's still into that, if you saw our show with Claire Willett, the Star Trek Snack Squad, which aims to get snacks and food to everybody on the lines, the temperatures are coming down a little bit, but it's still tedious out there. A lot of your favorites and all of our Treks are still down. What I hear is that some of the Trek shows that aren't close to filming, and we've got the big two. We've got Strange New live action, and then we've got further down the development pipeline, we've got Academy. And Section 31 is a 2-hour movie, but basically it's script written. So whatever the structural, whatever the production work can be done that doesn't involve writing, or in Academy's case, conceptualizing. They're still in the R&D phase. So different phases of them can come back, and then once in a month, maybe less, when the actors are wrapped up and tied up and they're free to come back and that strike is over and everybody wants everything all at once. The hurry up and go. People will be ready to spring into action. And you'll see that across all the different, the late night talk shows, the live shows, Saturday Night Lives, the scripted, the unscripted shows we used to call reality, that were anything but real. We'll see how that trickles back. And yeah, there won't be a fall per se, but maybe a mid-season will start to happen again. Depends on individual story type and what the lead time is. So that's the upfront on that. That's the confusion factor. So again, no writers picketing, writers strike on until the final votes are tallied and it's approved. Actors strike still in motion. No talks yet, but stay tuned. They might come any day as soon as they decide they can do both, finalize the writer's strike and sit down to prep up. This is on the producer's side, of course. SAG-AFTRA has been ready to go at any point. But yeah, the Writers Guild are the canary in the coal mine once again, and hopefully this won't take as long as even they did to get to the nitty-gritty. So, RIP writer's strike, fingers crossed. That's where we are right now. But RIP for somebody else. Someone that if you are a nonfiction Star Trek fan, and here's my split focus. If you're a RIP Star Trek fan, somebody you know as the author of, this is the original companion edition. I've seen some people talk about 19. Now, this was part of the Simon & Schuster getting all the rights, the fiction rights from Bantam, the nonfiction rights from Ballantine that sprung up with the first wave of Star Trek in the 70s. But with the coming of the motion picture, everything consolidated. And it went to Simon & Schuster, who was soon to join the Paramount family eventually. In those days, they technically weren't yet. Allan Asherman did a version of, well, it was a combination of things. What had been our Bibles? The only Bibles we had as Star Trek fandom exploded into view was the good old Making a Star Trek book. That was a Ballantine book. And now Simon & Schuster had the rights, and they needed a basic history making of Star Trek book. That fell to Allan Asherman, who was not a babe in the woods. So Allan was part of what I lovingly called the New York Star Trek Mafia. Jeff Mandel, Doug Drexler, that bunch that was clustered around, in large part, the Federation Trading Post retail store, which is right across the street from the publishers who got early dibs. And why I want to remember that Allan was not an overnight sensation here. And if you got, people are really have rediscovered him just since he made an appearance this last year at the new Long Island Trek. I am so jealous and envious of the folks who got there. Allan passed away. I got the news from Edwin Thrower, who worked on that convention. Allan had just been interviewed at the con and did some interviewing remotely. Never had the chance to meet him. Unfortunately, when you were a kid, you were stuck in the Midwest, and everything in New York and LA might as well have been the Emerald City, with no even a yellow brick road to even follow to get you there. And then in elder days here, we're busy with all the current Treks, working my way down through the original series, the 60s and the 70s era folks, the 80s era folks. My God, I finally got to talk to Harv Bennett in League for the Connor Rath documentary, but was looking forward, first of all, for a few years, people couldn't find the gentleman. That's why it was doubly shame. I had just gotten in touch with him through this reemergence. And it turns out that he died suddenly. Apparently, he had complications from a fall recently, and his health went downhill. He was 90, passed away Friday, Saturday. The obituaries are coming now. You're learning more about his life. A lot of folks that I'm envious of got to talk to him back in the day and now. But the best thing we can do now is talk about the legacy, a legacy that may have been overlooked in the avalanche of Star Trek writing that's happened since. But yes, he wrote the compendium. And, here's the deal. While Stephen Whitfield Poe's Making of Star Trek book was a classic, and it was the early Bible, and it was the only thing we had at the day, By the boom of the 70s, we started to have things like the giant poster book, which was a gimmick for the big poster, but also had incredible articles inside. Yeah, episode recaps, those were a dime a dozen, but people daring to get in and talk about Star Trek background, the Star Trek universe. And I remember the day I walked in and to my first visit to a comic book shop, nostalgia shop, and it happened to be issue 8 with McCoy on the cover. I still have my set. They're buried. I didn't dig them out, but what I wanted to talk about was walking into a store that had this beautiful color cover picture, not like what you'd seen technically when you managed to see color. And we're talking the 70s here, when I was a teenager, and just the thunderclap of not having any McCoy anything that you'd see in the catalogs, and walking in, and here he is on the front cover of the giant poster book in glossy, gorgeous color, because the gimmick of the poster, something that had to be in pre-digital time, something that would be have enough resolution, like a clear tranny, a transparency, bigger than a 35 millimeter slide. Because once you blew it up to even that size for a poster for your bedroom wall, that was the gimmick, right? It unfolded to where the different panels that had articles, finally you had a poster. Well, I never hung up my posters because I wanted to keep the magazine. And even then, some of the issues got used a lot. The Enterprise issue, the McCoy medical props issue, the issue of the history of the Federation with the timeline that wound up going into the medical reference, that wound up being the time, not the chronology timeline, but the one that became the basis, where Khan was not 200 years in the future, as he'd been told, or the 200 years. But anyway, we use the canon points, not one single lines of dialogue. My point is that Allan Asherman was part of all that. He was part of the 70s boom. He was lucky enough to get the history book so that Simon & Schuster had a Trek history on top of all the just glossy bits coming out of the movie, right? Which included the chronology as well. So now we had a making of book that was organized in pieces. And I will say that when I was lucky and privileged enough and broke through from the wilds of Oklahoma to get on the attention, to get the radar and be a finalist, and then be chosen to do what became the Next Generation companion, I had two models. I knew the bar that Stephen Whitfield Poe and B. Joe Trimble had, and what Allan Asherman had done. And it was a simple format here. It was a synopsis followed by his production notes, which, if you see the first edition and then you see the one redone a few years later, which was always republished for each succeeding movie. This is the time of the motion picture, but for every 80s original series movie, they'd add in 4 or 6 pages, which I used to curse. I used to curse that. What do they think we are? We're going to buy a new book every time they slap 4 new pages in. I know now, working in licensed publishing, that was not Allan Asherman. That was Simon & Schuster. Here, just stick a few pages in. We're not going to reshoot the other bit. The big edit came with The Wrath of Khan. A lot of his suppositions and guessings were stripped out. The next edition of this and all the succeeding editions have a lot less speculation and a lot less personal memory and reflection. Allan was at the 66 Cleveland Worldcon, Tricon, when Gene brought his 2 movies to show before Star Trek had aired, when he brought The Cage and when he brought Where No Man. He was giving a preview to the hardcore science fiction audience to get the buzz started, as we would say now, and that's what happened. And Allan writes about that memory. It gets stripped away in later years. But a lot of the personal New York media references that he throws into the compendium are taken away. And it becomes stripped down, mainly to cram more. And after that first big re-edit, then it's just a matter of adding 4 or 6 or 8 pages for every succeeding movie, which in my youth I thought was a ripoff. They're just slapping Star Trek on that to get us to buy it. Well, they were. And I acquired 1 or 2, later on just to have them. No, that basic format is what I followed with a lot of tweaks. The things that I liked, but it's not organized enough. This needs to be bulleted right here. This doesn't include this. There was so much that I wanted to bring to and combine things from Bijo's concordance, even though I wasn't doing an encyclopedia. this is why he was one of the main models for what the companion became, including the fact that when we started doing this, they said, are we going to call this the TNG Compendium? And I said, no, that's going to get confusing. Why don't we call it a companion? And then if you do one for DS9, we can call it something else. I even had like a list of C words. We could have the compendium, the companion. And I know for a while, the TNG Compendium, it's like whenever you change something, the next thing that changes gets called wrong until the next come along. And suddenly everybody calls the second thing by its correct name. And then the third thing is called incorrectly when you do that. And so everything since then has just been a companion. But in the beginning, I said, no, let's not call it compendium again. So Allan will forever have the Star Trek Compendium for whatever that's worth. But Allan will forever have my thanks, even though, as I said, I never got to meet the man and was looking forward to doing it, even over Zoom here with help. But you should know that not only did Allan write, he was lucky enough there in New York to parlay that and get to do the Star Trek interview book, which not only has obligatory, yes, right? This is from the 82 wave. This is when they're wanting more books as the Wrath of Khan nears. Isn't that right? 82? Oh, this is 88. All right. Wanting some of this down. He did interviews, not just with the cast and the leading guest stars, but this is some of the first behind the scenes real interviewing, aside from the snippets you'd get in the world of Star Trek and some of the random interviews you'd see. This is the first mass published real interview book of behind the scenes folks, including the directors, those names you saw. And of course, you know, the inspiration for everything I want to do about getting these people more attention and more insight for you into knowing that it goes way beyond the actors and even the writers, even though the writers get slighted and overlooked at times, the producers, but all the major guilds are represented in his interview book. And yes, I'm sure Memory Alpha has pilfered, I'm sorry, attributed a lot to that. But even better, Susan Sackett did a making of book for the motion picture. Gene was out of the favored nation status by then. Allan Asherman got to write a making of, the obligatory making of Star Trek II book. Did this sell a lot? No. That's why there is no making of Star Trek III book from Simon & Schuster from Pocket Books. Is the finale with the casket on the... No, because one of the damn things about hardcore old school publishing is deadlines. And if you wanted a book to be out at the time of the movie release, you had a 6-month advance deadline. And guess who's still making basic decisions about movies? Guess who's still working on special effects? Guess who is not going to leak visual effects pictures with them potentially getting out if they're left laying around in a drawing room somewhere, in a drafting room in New York, and the janitor comes in and grabs the pictures, and now they're out and they've ruined the movie. Much less the timeline of when decisions are made. Much less what was in as we see with the novelizations, what was in a script and what was deleted. And you're writing, you're making a book. Not only are you not including the changes that happened organically, you're talking about things that were filmed that the public sees the movie in 1982 days and goes, that wasn't in the movie. Well, the concept of deleted scenes and a savvy movie TV media audience has come a long way in 40 years. We all know now what a gag reel is, i.e. the blooper reel. We all know now what deleted scenes are, and we have them as bonus features, not on VHS tapes, but yes, in the DVD and beyond era. So good on Allan, even though this book is, it so leans into the early bit. But even then, we weren't through the statute of limitations when anybody could legally admit that Nick Meyer actually wrote the script. So he's got to go through, talk about the early drafts, but just not give Nick Meyer credit for how he pulled them all together in 5 days, and they shot a movie without losing any more time. So yes, there's omissions, but still he got to do this book. There's a lot laid down here. It has to go through the studio publishing, Happy Talk licensing. There's not going to be any real controversy here. Not that it needs to be yellow journalism, but just to talk about the creative differences. It was a very pristine time and one that I was still navigating in the 80s with the companion, and was very happy when I could at least talk about creative differences without getting into the details. And thank you for Chaos on the Bridge for letting us talk about, Gene's attorney, Majlish. But Allan Asherman did all this. He wrote articles in the poster book. But he was more than Star Trek. He worked at DC Comics. He worked at Federation Trading Post. Doug knew him. Doug had the privilege to know him. The New York gang did. Jeff did. All the folks from that era. The late, great Anthony Fredrickson did. What I didn't realize until lately was it was Allan Asherman's extreme collection of Star Trek transparencies that provided all those blow-upable poster images. Without Allan's collection, you wouldn't have had the poster of the giant poster book. The giant poster would have been, maybe you were losing it when you went to page size, much less that big. But all the glorious, beautiful color shots and rare pics from a year of when everybody was collecting film clips, those were Allan's collection for the most part. Yeah, Doug and Jeff had theirs too. But what really got me was what may have been the first nonfiction behind-the-scenes writing on Star Trek. And thank you, Doug, for posting this in his Facebook. Back in the day, Starlog didn't exist. Starlog wouldn't exist until 76. And then barely, and then 77, 78. We were years away from behind-the-scenes writing, that there was a market for it. So it was Frankenstein, Castle of Frankenstein, one of the Monster Craze magazines of the mid-60s, that was genre that way. And somewhere between the Westerns and old-time radio world and the Monsters world, bridged over into some kind of, each carry science fiction articles. I don't mean like literature like the sci-fi mags had. I mean behind-the-scenes bits. And Doug shared pages from issue number 11 of Castle of Frankenstein Monster with a color cover, but everything black and white inside. And an article that Allan Asherman wrote in June of 67. So as the first season of Star Trek is wrapping up, Allan has written an article in the closest thing to a genre magazine. It's everything. It's a look at the act. Everything is fresh and new. And he's talking about the philosophy and the smash that it's had in the genre world, sci-fi world, talking about the cast, talking about interviews where you can find them, talking about visual effects, special effects, as we'd say then, and a little personal essay about how amazing Star Trek was just 1 year in. And to prove that, he's got a sidebar here where he talks about the alien worlds. He's got a still of the largely unused Taurus 2 creature, right, that's throwing boulders at the Galileo that they decided looked horrendous and we couldn't show. He's got the still of that wasn't used in the episode, but he asked the question talking about planets. When will the Enterprise crew beam down on Spock's home planet Vulcan, where everybody thinks logically, without emotion? Now, that would be quite an evening. He didn't know that, right about that time, they were conceiving and filming Amok Time. But he's written this piece before this introduction to Star Trek, the first glance at getting across who these actors are. And and he's using the studio biographies out of the press kit. I know he is. But he's looking at the overlap of the universe's technology with getting the visual effects done. Anyway, it's a 4 or 5 page thing. Look at Doug's Facebook. It's an easy way to find it right now in the moment. It's a lot of the black and white pictures wind up being in Steve Poe's book, which is another year or two away. End of the second season. It just reinforces how long Allan had been part of the sci-fi genre scene. And again, he worked at DC Comics. He did odd jobs as a writer in New York, but you could do that in the 60s, and you could do it in New York, and he was well-based. Again, Allan Asherman, far more than just the compendium. All these books, all that writing, all the rest of his career passed away. I selfishly say, damn, I did not get to talk to him, but there are interviews. He's got a body of work, and I'm going to say that over the next few months, a lot of it's going to be resurrected and come to light. I just want to do my part here to say, let's all give a shout out. Let's all give a hat tip. And so envious of the folks at Long Island Trek who got to see him and meet him and hear from him and see him do some interviews that got to start to begin to, as we've done so often with the names who are buried along the way, whether they worked on the show, on the series, and I'm talking especially the original series, or helped perpetuate it, help get the word out there and preserve the stories and preserve the voices of the creators in their own way, helped pass along Star Trek and preserve it for us. And know what an amazing, as much as we crank out new Star Treks now and worry about are they, just remembering what a struggle and what a gobsmacking event the original series was. So for everybody who blithely sits back here in 2023 and critiques the original series without context, without thinking what an uphill boulder that was to push to the top of the hill for Gene and all of his team. And then for marketing and salespeople and an audience to win acceptance and to talk about Star Trek outside your sci-fi closet. And where we are today and how Star Trek, yes, enabled Star Wars and enabled the geek revolution by the 80s, by the late 70s, much less the 80s, and everything that's come since. And Allan was part of that generation, part of that crowd, and had a huge hand in bringing it to the masses. So, R.I.P. Allan. R.I.P. Allan Asherman, after an incredible life and not near enough attention that we are going to remedy now. So, yes. Let me take a breather here. And speaking of the help, thank all of our Patreons for helping me bring this every week. So thank you in our TTL Club. Thanks to Diana Hopkins, Robin Wilson, Lawrence Todd, Anne-Marie Siegel, Justin Porteous, Galinda Bruton, Chris Jiggins, Pranakasha Productions, Comedy Forecaster Andrew Jazimski, and our live wires. That's Robert McLean, Byron Bailey, J.R. Poole, Hubbard Gunjohnson, Alan Hoensi, Dave Gregory, Tobias Rex, Donna S. Runyon, and Casey Shafsky. If you'd like to join them and help me do this, again, my very simple Patreon. I've had people go, why don't you have more levels? That may be in the offing down the line. But for right now, I say $5, $10 a month through Patreon. If you haven't checked it out, it's there. There are other crowdfunding support apps out there. I'm just going to stick with Patreon for now. I know. Patreon.com/Trekland Live. Thank you so much and appreciate it. It's a shout out, and the $10 folk get access, which I need to do again, access to our early archive of another batch from the earlier years of Portal 47. Speaking of which, just join Portal 47. It's awesome. Hey, we are still on hiatus, as a reminder, for the Trek Files, but there's 10 years. There's 240 episodes there. Speaking of folks no longer with us, some of them are included in there too, like Dorothy Fontana, like Richard Arnold, and Gerald Fried, the composer. So lucky to have him on just a couple years ago. The Trek Files is there. We will be back in a few weeks from hiatus with a new season, our 11th season. But for right now, you can check it out. And there's a new podcast at Roddenberry called Genealogy, where my good friend Earl Green and Norm Lau are looking at the meanings, morals, and messages of Gene's non-Star Trek work. And we don't just mean the lieutenant or those 30 scripts of Have Gun Will Travel, if you can even find them. No, they're looking at the catalog. They're looking at Gene's files too, with a whole different purpose, to look at the meat and how much of Gene's Trek philosophy was present in everything he wrote, even as a younger writer, even as an older writer. Look for that, and look for me anywhere you find the little X-Bird at Larry Nemecek there. Hey, it's Larry Nemecek's Trekland right here on YouTube. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and share, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Also on Instagram, also on Facebook. Yeah, it's portal47.net, and I'm serious. You can help us out there and be part of the Portales community. Tomorrow night is guest night for September, and I'm so thrilled after years of chasing him to finally get, I mentioned him earlier, Jeff Mandel. It's just a thing to me because we were kids when we first started writing long distance. Oh, not calling, long distance cost. But a New York kid and an Oklahoma kid working on backgrounding Star Trek, he was in the hot seat and got to write and contribute to the poster book and to the medical reference and create his own self-publishing before that was a thing that I could understand. The Officer's Manual. And then, yes, we finally meet when he's working on Star Trek Generations, of all things. Oh, my God. And then Insurrection and Enterprise and Voyager for a bit, and the star charting, and then on Picard season 2 and 3. Can't wait to have Jeff finally in our Portal 47 guest window. But that's going to do it for me. For everybody who's catching this later on YouTube, I wish you could join us sometime on a Tuesday, 1-ish Pacific, 4-ish Eastern. That's only 9 UK time, 10 Central Europe. So yeah, we have, and the Aussies are the next morning. Thanks for joining us again. Join us live if you can. Check out everything Star Trek at LarryNemecek.com. Everything Trekland, I should say. Star Trek's a little bit wider berth, but everything in my corner that you see, including the TeePublic shop for some swag, for some stuff, cool stuff. That's all there at TeePublic too. So yes, everybody, please stay healthy. Do the things, get a booster shot, and flu and the whole bit. When did we become so anti? Oh, forget it. Forget the politics. If you could time travel back to the 50s and tell people lining up to get the polio shot that there might be a problem with it, no one would care because the alternative was so horrendous. It got better, I thought. So please do all the things. Oh, yeah, and stay woke. Check the sources. I guess what I'm saying once again, struck well, everybody.